In late 18th century Europe, chemists chased a puzzle that began with a colour. A popular blue pigment, Prussian blue, showed up in dyes, inks and paints, useful, stable, and seemingly harmless. But when experimenters heated it or broke it down with acids, something strange happened. A sharp-smelling vapour appeared, and it acted like a substance with a will of its own. A craft material had started pointing toward a hidden chemical. In 1782, the Swedish chemist Carl Wilhelm Scheele managed to isolate that vapour in liquid form. He called it prussic acid, linking it back to the pigment that led him there. It did not behave like an ordinary acid, and its effects came fast. Small exposures in animals produced sudden collapse. The lesson landed hard in the laboratory. The same chemistry that helped create a prized blue also produced a poison that attacked the body almost immediately. Chemists kept testing, naming, and comparing what they had found, and prussic acid gradually became understood as what people later called hydrogen cyanide. Its danger did not come from burning skin or leaving visible damage. It came from how quickly it shut down life from the inside. That speed changed how laboratories treated the substance, even before it had a broad use. A beautiful pigment had revealed a silent, fast-acting killer. In the early 1800s, chemists stopped treating cyanide as a rare laboratory surprise and started turning it into products. By binding that dangerous acid to metals, they created cyanide salts that looked stable enough to weigh, store, and ship. That changed everything. A substance once known mainly by its sudden violent effects now moved in labelled jars between universities, apothecaries, and workshops. Risk stopped being accidental. It became routine. Once cyanide salts circulated, experiments became repeatable. Researchers tested doses, reactions, and mixtures with a new confidence because the material held together long enough to measure. Doctors and pharmacists also experimented, drawn by the era's belief that powerful chemicals could be controlled and used as remedies. Small amounts ended up in medicine cabinets, not as a poison, but as a tool. The promise sounded modern. The margin for error stayed razor thin. Commercial handling brought a new kind of danger: access. Cyanide no longer depended on a specialist making it fresh. It could be purchased, stored, and misused. Accidents followed the same simple pattern: mistaken identity, careless measuring, poor ventilation, and the body had little time to recover. What made cyanide frightening now was not just how fast it worked, it was how easily ordinary people could come into contact with it. By the mid-1800s, industry demanded metal surfaces that looked perfect and lasted. Electroplating answered that demand, using electricity to lay a thin skin of metal onto another. But the process needed a reliable way to hold metals in solution and deliver them evenly. Cyanide baths did that job. They made gold and silver plating smoother, steadier, and easier to repeat. Production scaled up. Quality became predictable. Factories adopted cyanide solutions for more than decoration. Metal finishing used them to clean, brighten, and prepare parts before they went into machines, instruments, and household goods. Cyanide complexes controlled how copper, zinc, silver, and gold moved in the bath, so coatings stuck instead of peeling or blotching. The chemistry solved a practical problem, so it spread fast. Workshops turned into supply chains, and cyanide moved with them. That shift changed what cyanide meant in daily life. It no longer sat mainly in small bottles handled by specialists. It sat in tanks, in factory routines, and in the margins of ordinary products. The same chemical known for sudden death became a tool of consistency and speed. The risk did not disappear. It became normalized. Modern manufacturing depended on it, and the dependence kept growing because it worked. By the late 1800s, gold still meant power, but the easy gold already disappeared. Prospectors and companies faced a frustrating truth. Huge amounts of metal sat locked inside low-grade rock that old methods left behind. Then a new technique spread through the mining world: cyanidation. Crushed ore went into a cyanide solution, and the gold dissolved out of it. The chemistry did not just find gold, it made poor ore profitable. The change hit like a switch. Mines that looked exhausted suddenly looked rich again, and new fields opened in places once dismissed as worthless. Cyanide became the key ingredient in modern gold extraction, because it worked at scale and for small concentrations. Investors followed the math, and the math pointed to cyanide. Gold production rose, fortunes grew, and national treasuries benefited. A chemical once handled in workshops now sat at the center of global wealth. But the same feature that made cyanidation powerful also made it dangerous. It required large volumes of toxic solution, stored in ponds and circulated through mills day after day. Waste rock and leftover liquid accumulated, and leaks and overflows became more than local accidents. They became environmental exposure on an industrial scale. Waterways, soil, and wildlife faced the risk, often with little warning and few rules. Cyanide no longer stayed inside a controlled tank, it spread. By the early 1900s, cyanide stopped feeling like an industrial chemical and started sounding like a headline. Small doses killed fast, and that speed mattered. People who wanted an immediate end reached for cyanide salts or prussic acid, and newspapers reported the sudden collapses in plain, frightening terms. It did not need a blade or a gun, it needed only a swallow, and then time ran out. It also slipped into murder. Cyanide did not announce itself with a smell most people recognized, and it left little that an untrained eye could read. That uncertainty fed suspicion. A death that looked like fainting or heart trouble could later turn into a poisoning story once a chemist became involved. In courtrooms and press reports, cyanide gained a new identity. A weapon that hid inside everyday drinks and medicines. As these cases piled up, the fear spread beyond the individuals involved. Cyanide became the classic invisible poison in the public imagination, quiet, quick, and easy to conceal. That reputation changed behavior. Investigators leaned more on toxicology tests, families questioned unexplained deaths, and ordinary people learned the name of a chemical they had never handled. Cyanide remained useful to industry, but it also became notorious for what it could do in secret. By 1914, Europe's major powers treated chemistry as a military tool. Poison gas already shaped the battlefield, and researchers tested many candidates for the next breakthrough. Hydrogen cyanide drew attention because it killed quickly and spread as a vapor. Armies studied it, filled shells and canisters, and measured how it behaved in wind and trenches. The promise sounded simple. In practice, it proved hard to control. Hydrogen cyanide dispersed fast, but it also vanished fast. Outdoors, it often diluted before it reached lethal levels, especially compared with heavier gases that clung to the ground. Masks and improved training reduced its impact even more. Yet the work did not stop. Military labs kept refining production, storage, and delivery because the logic of total war rewarded any chemical that might scale. The research created something new: government systems built to handle cyanide in bulk. After the armistice, that same capacity shifted toward another kind of target: pests. Farmers, shippers, and city officials faced insects and rodents that threatened food and public health, and fumigation promised a clean solution. Hydrogen cyanide moved into warehouses, rail cars, and buildings under organized programs, often supervised or licensed by the state. It sounded like modern control through science. It also normalized cyanide as a mass-use chemical. World War II pushed chemicals into every corner of policy and production, and cyanide was no exception. A pesticide called Zyklon B, made to kill insects and rodents, circulated as a practical tool for controlling disease in crowded conditions. It released hydrogen cyanide gas when exposed to air. That gas acted fast, cutting off the body's ability to use oxygen. What had been a product of pest control became something else entirely. In Nazi-occupied Europe, the German state built a system meant to eliminate whole populations, especially Jews, and it relied on methods that scaled. Zyklon B fit that goal because it was easy to transport, store, and deploy. It moved from delousing chambers into extermination camps, including Auschwitz-Birkenau. There, people were killed in sealed spaces by hydrogen cyanide released from pellets. Murder became scheduled, repeatable, and bureaucratic. This was the grim turning point in cyanide's history. The same chemistry that had served industry and pest control got folded into genocide, not as a battlefield weapon, but as a tool of administration. The results were catastrophic. Mass death on an unprecedented scale, carried out with ordinary supply chains and routine procedures. After the war, Zyklon B stood as a symbol of how a common chemical could be weaponized for industrialized murder. After World War II, the world divided into rival camps, and secrets mattered as much as armies. Intelligence services built their work around the fear of capture, interrogation, and forced betrayal. In that logic, cyanide found a new role. It was small, fast, and final. A tiny capsule could turn a prisoner into a dead end. Cyanide stopped being just a chemical people recognized. It became a tool of last resort. The idea of the cyanide suicide pill spread far beyond the people who actually carried one. Spies were searched for hidden capsules in teeth, pens, coins, and cuffs, and every rumor made the concept feel more common than it was. The point was simple. If escape failed, information still had to be protected. This turned cyanide into a kind of insurance policy for intelligence work. It also fed a steady public fascination with invisible death. Cold War governments also planned for worst-case scenarios, and cyanide sat inside that thinking as a feared industrial and battlefield poison. Emergency manuals treated it as an inhalation hazard that could overwhelm a person before help arrived. Training stressed speed, recognize symptoms, move to fresh air, give antidotes fast. The result was a new kind of dread. Cyanide was no longer only tied to crime or war. It lived inside preparedness drills and the background anxiety of the age. By the late 20th century, cyanide no longer felt like a rare poison. It sat inside ordinary supply chains, metal plants, chemical factories, and especially mines. When something went wrong, it went wrong fast. A pipe leak or a tank failure turned into a cloud, a burn, a collapse. Emergency crews treated it like a race against minutes. Communities learned a hard lesson. The danger did not always come from criminals. It came from routine work. The disasters also arrived through products people trusted. In 1982, cyanide-laced Tylenol capsules killed shoppers around Chicago, and the shock spread across the country. The contamination did not come from the factory, but it changed industry anyway. Bottles gained tamper-evident seals. Recalls became faster and louder. Testing and tracking tightened. The point was simple. cyanide did not need access to a lab. It only needed access to a shelf. Mining spills forced the same kind of reckoning on a larger scale. In 2000, a tailings dam failure at Baia Mare released cyanide into waterways that fed the Danube basin, killing fish and triggering bans and investigations across borders. Similar leaks elsewhere kept repeating the pattern. Each time, the response grew more technical and more legal. Stricter limits, mandatory reporting, continuous monitors, better alarms, and better antidote planning. Regulation expanded because the accidents kept returning. In the present day, cyanide still sat at the center of industries that powered modern life. Gold mining still relied on cyanide solutions to pull tiny traces of metal from huge amounts of rock because few methods worked as efficiently at that scale. Manufacturing also kept using cyanide in controlled processes, especially in metal finishing, where it helped shape coatings that resisted wear and corrosion. The chemical never disappeared. It became routine. But routine never meant casual. After spills and poisonings, cyanide handling followed strict rules that treated it like a constant emergency waiting to happen. Mines and factories used closed systems, trained crews, and documented transport. Sensors checked air and water. Waste streams got tested before they left a site. When things went wrong, response plans already existed, with teams ready to isolate leaks fast. The goal stayed simple: keep a necessary chemical from escaping. Medicine also changed the balance. Hospitals and emergency responders used modern antidotes and oxygen support to buy time because cyanide still attacked the body in minutes. Monitoring improved too, so exposure got recognized faster instead of guessed too late. Cyanide ended as a managed ubiquity, indispensable, measured, tracked, and restricted. That reality stood in sharp contrast to the earliest era, when prussic acid first emerged as a baffling discovery, a mystery poison with no guardrails.